Um, Good evening. Good evening. Welcome everybody to this important conversation that we're having tonight. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Paballo Thekiso, and I have the awesome privilege of leading the community here at Following Jesus. And yeah, it's awesome to be here with you all, with Dr. Jenny, who I'll introduce to us just now, and I'll give her some space to also get to introduce herself and share what she'll be sharing with us. So here is how this thing is going to work tonight. We are going to have Dr. Jenny share with us for like 10-15 minutes some information that she feels is important for all of us regarding the vaccines. And then from there, I'll get into a mini role play with her where I'll ask her some questions. And then from there, we'll open the floor to all of us to engage, because we don't want this to be a monologue between me and her, a dialogue between me and her. We want this to be a conversation where everybody can get a chance to to ask questions or to participate in this conversation. So yeah, so we are thankful that I'm sorry, something is on my throat. We are thankful that we have Dr. Jenny with us. So in a quick introduction, Dr. Jenny is a follower of Jesus for many, many years. She was brought up in a Christian home, and like many of us, fell away, and God reached out and drew her back to himself in the early 30s. And she has a husband who works in a TB vaccine research, and she has 2 adult sons. She works as a GP in Cape Town and is involved as in lay leadership in her church. And during this pandemic, she's been treating her own patients who've been battling COVID, and also doing case calling for the Western Cape Department of Health, calling people all over the metro to advise them about their own care and about looking after their contacts. So she's also done coronavirus education in a couple of churches and schools and children's homes. And she's basically a member of society who cares and who just wants to see people well. So Dr. Jenny, we welcome you here, and we thank you for taking time to be with us tonight. So Dr. Jenny, I'm just going to hand over to you to basically share with us some of the information that you think is important for us to know, and as you lay the foundation for this conversation. So over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Paballo. And thank you, Jen, for making the contact and inviting me. And thanks very much for everyone who's come along to I'm not going to say listen, I'm going to say share and ask questions. So yeah, thanks for coming. And I think Paballo's introduced me very well, thank you. I love what I've heard about your church, actually. I love your name, Following Jesus, and I love what Jen told me about your emphasis on really fostering diversity. So I'm sure I could learn a lot from you, and maybe you'll be able to help me sometime with that, because that's what my church is struggling with. But yeah, today we're here to talk about COVID, as ever. And I'm going to try to give a very brief introduction. What I thought I'd do is just tell you a tiny little bit about our current situation and this new variant, the Delta variant, and then I'll go a little bit into vaccines, and hopefully there will be time for questions afterwards. I'm not a specialist, I'm not an expert, I'm very interested in COVID, I've studied it a lot, but there are going to be questions I don't know the answer to. Sometimes other people in the room will know the answer, sometimes specialists somewhere in the world will know the answer, and sometimes with a lot of COVID, there are just no answers yet. So the current situation, if you like numbers, we've had about 200 million cases of COVID in the world, and 4.3 million of those people have died. So it's a big epidemic. In South Africa, of the cases we've counted, and we're not that great at counting cases here, but of the cases we've counted, we've had 2.5 million cases. Of the deaths that we've counted, we've had about 85,000, but it's very likely that in South Africa, looking at all deaths from COVID, we're talking more about kind of 200,000 or so. You will know that Gauteng is coming off a brutal, brutal third wave of COVID. Where I'm from, which is in Cape Town in the Western Cape, unfortunately, we are still very much in our third wave, and our numbers seem to be going up, I think, faster than your numbers are going down. So we're still in that really hard bit of the wave. That's all I'm going to say about numbers. Then about variants, because we all hear this word variant. Just to say that variants in viruses are completely normal and completely natural. Like all living beings, viruses change over time. The reason you don't look exactly like a clone of your parents is because you've changed a bit over time. Viruses do exactly the same thing. Normally it doesn't matter because the variations, you know, one virus has blue eyes, one virus has brown eyes, so what? But every now and then, a variant comes along which could really win the Olympic sprint race. And that is a variant which just outclasses all the others by being much easier to spread. And that's what we're facing now with the Delta virus. If you think about evolution, it is in the virus's interests to spread more and more and to become more and more transmissible. And that is actually what we've seen with each wave. But equally, it's absolutely not in the interests of a virus to become more and more severe. In fact, quite the reverse. If it becomes too severe and kills too many people too quickly, the virus will die out. So although the variants have become more transmissible, there's really no reason to believe that they're going to keep on becoming more severe. And I find that quite comforting. So Delta variant is our newest. It's very unlikely to be our last, because that's what viruses do. It has very rapidly become the dominant virus worldwide. There are a few things we know about it. Firstly, it is much easier to spread. So it is, people say it's about as infectious as chickenpox. It is much more infectious than our last variant, much more infectious than the common cold, more infectious than flu. We know that. And we know that people infected with Delta have more virus in their system. So they're going to be coughing out more and spreading it more. And we also know, unfortunately, that they shed it for longer. So after getting infected, they produce virus more quickly and they produce more of it. We also know that reinfections are more likely with Delta. The things that we kind of suspect, but we're not sure of yet, is maybe it's a little bit more severe. We don't really know that yet. And certainly it does seem to affect children more than the other two did, more than the other dominant variants have. Again, we think that, but we don't know it. And perhaps that is driving some of the epidemic that you had in Gauteng and that we've had here. So that's all I'm going to say about the numbers and variants. Let's talk about vaccines, my favorite topic. I love vaccines, let me just say. I love the science behind them. I love the way they've been developed so quickly. Just to say, people have been getting vaccines. I imagine that everybody listening has had at least one vaccine, if not many. Babies get them the world over, children get them the world over. We know that vaccines stop people from getting sick and dying from illnesses like measles, smallpox, polio, all sorts. So as a whole world, we believe in vaccines. And COVID is just another vaccine. That's all it is. If I asked you, maybe you've had a tetanus vaccine, maybe you've got children. Paballo, I don't know if you've got children, but if you have, I imagine they've been vaccinated. Do you know how the measles vaccine was developed and exactly what's in it and how many people tested it?
No.
But somehow, yeah, exactly. But somehow with COVID, we kind of just are a bit more anxious about it. Understandably, absolutely understandably. So what is a vaccine? A vaccine is just a chemical that teaches your body to recognize a new sickness that it hasn't had before, helps your body to build an army of cells and antibodies against that sickness before the sickness can make you actually ill, before the germs can make you ill. One of the wonderful things about the way God made our bodies is he made us to fight off infections. So we've got a whole immune system which is made to fight infections. And all we're doing with vaccines is we're just ramping up that immune system a little bit. So have any of you ever had, Paballo, you're the only one I can see, so I'm going to have to address my questions to you. Have you ever had a cold?
Yes, many times.
And did it make you sick?
Sometimes very sick, sometimes just
Okay,
mild.
so that was a man cold. It was a man cold. Did you stay sick forever, or did your wife only think you were going to stay sick forever?
She's
Oh,
the
wow.
way he was behaving.
Oh.
Okay, so why do you think you didn't stay sick forever? The reason you didn't stay sick is that your body started to make soldier antibodies and soldier cells to fight off the cold. And so after a few days, your body had recognized the cold, learned how to ramp up its soldiers against it, and beaten it off. Now imagine if before the virus, the cold virus, could even make you sick, your body already had the recipe and you already had the soldier cells and the soldier antibodies to fight it. Then they would get in and they would be destroyed immediately. So that is what a vaccine does. It introduces your body to the enemy in a very safe way and in a way that enables your body to train its army and get it up to speed so that when the real enemy comes along, you can defeat it quickly. The body can just say, oh yeah, okay, I recognize you, I know what to do with you, I know what kills you, bang, bang, off you go, and you're killed before you even make the person sick. So vaccines are taking the body's natural processes and using the body to fight the infection. And yeah, as I said, we all believe in vaccines. I'm sure everybody here has been vaccinated. We get vaccinated to travel. We get vaccinated if we have a tetanus. We get vaccinated for wounds. We vaccinate our children. It's actually compulsory for healthcare workers to be vaccinated against certain diseases, like hepatitis B. Yet they complain about being vaccinated against COVID for complicated reasons. So I think, and I won't keep picking on Paballo, I'll just keep my introduction short. I think we're scared of vaccines because of COVID vaccines, because COVID is such a new thing. We think that we don't know very much about it. It hasn't been around for a long time. It feels like the vaccine has been made too quickly. It feels like people didn't have enough time to study it. And because there's so much anxiety in the world at the moment, some of that anxiety is going into the COVID vaccine. So I think it's very understandable that people are scared of vaccines. I don't think we need to be if we study the science. And then, of course, the people who are scared of vaccines think that they are doing everyone a favor by warning them about how dangerous they are. So all these people who put messages on social media, they're not trying to cause problems. They're not trying to make a fuss. What they're trying to say is, I believe this is really dangerous. I want to help you not to take it. So yeah, all this misinformation circulates on social media. And of course, unfortunately, actually, I got caught up by a bit of misinformation today about what the French president had apparently said, and I spread it without even thinking about it. It was a pro-vaccine bit of information, but people circulate anti-vaccine information before they even look at it and read it themselves. So I do understand why people are scared. What I'm going to do a little bit about now is how it's made. Is it safe? is it effective, and who should get it? If you want the short version, it's made safe, it's made carefully, it is safe, it is effective, and almost everyone can get it. If you all believe that, we can close now and I can go and have my supper. But if you want me to expand on it a little bit, this is what I believe about how it was made. I believe that the vaccine was part of God's answer to prayer. I believe that people prayed all around the world when this thing came upon us. And God provided for us in many ways. He didn't take COVID away, but one of the things he provided was a vaccine. Other people might disagree with me. So how it happened, scientists studied the virus very, very quickly. And because they've studied so many other viruses before, they could understand the virus and work out its whole gene sequence or its whole protein sequence very, very quickly. They then used years and decades of knowledge of making vaccines. Knowing how vaccines are made and how vaccines are safely made, and then knowing what the virus looked like, they could put it together and find vaccines that worked. Once they found vaccines that they thought worked, they trialed them. I think it would be true to say hundreds of vaccines were trialed. And the few that actually did prove themselves to work were trialed first in very small groups of people to make sure they were safe. That's called phase 1. Then they were trialed in much larger groups of people to make sure they're still safe when you give them to thousands of people and that they still work. And then they went through all the due process of registration and scientific inquiry that anything else goes through, any drug goes through before it's registered. So it sounds as if that should take a long time, doesn't it? I wonder why, Paballo, I want to ask you questions that I know you're not my student, so I'll just give the answer. Why do you think it was made so quickly? Why do you think it was made so quickly? I'm going to give you the answer to that. I think it was made very quickly because COVID was an illness that was affecting lots of people in every country in the world, and it was affecting rich people, rich countries, powerful people, powerful countries, people who had a hang of a lot of money to put into the development and who had a hang of a lot of motivation to get everybody working together quickly. So usually when a new drug is being developed, each pharmaceutical company has to fight for money to develop it, and then they hold on to their secret because they want to release it to the world and make lots of money. That actually didn't happen with COVID, and that is one of the miracles of the COVID vaccination, is because it was such a huge problem, money was poured in and everybody shared information very readily and very quickly. So there was lots of money, lots of cooperation. The other two slightly more technical things is there was a lot of COVID around, and COVID happens very quickly. So if you want to look for a vaccine for TB or HIV, yes, there's a lot around, but not nearly as much. And it takes much longer to see if a vaccine's effective. With COVID, you can give a vaccine today, and in a month's time, you can tell if it's been effective because the numbers are so high. Equally, there were lots of volunteers because that scary phase of being the first human to have a vaccine, usually you have to pay people a lot of money to be that first human. But there were altruistic people stepped forward and said, I'm going to put myself on the line for this. And so there were plenty of volunteers. And then the last thing is that all the regulators, all the scientists, all the agencies whose job it was to actually analyze the information produced in the trials didn't do their usual thing of waiting until the whole trial was finished, putting it in the back of the queue, stopping for tea, public holidays. No, what they did was they did this thing called rolling reviews. So as soon as any bits of information came out from the people doing the trials, they would send it to the regulators would check it and do their own analyses, they would go and check the factories, they would do all the sorts of things that they usually only do afterwards. But instead they did them while the drug was being developed, while the vaccines were being developed. So all of these things made it much faster, but they did also go through all the safety steps. And because my husband's in the business, I watched the first submission of the Pfizer vaccine going through the Federal Drug Agency. I think that's what it is in America. And I can tell you it was a long and complicated process, and it was finely analyzed. So that's why it was quick. Is it safe? Well, I think it is. I've had it. I made sure my 92-year-old mother had it. She's got heart disease and all sorts, but you know, I've tried to encourage everybody I know to have it because I do believe it's safe. So we know how it's been made. We know exactly what's in it. Every batch that comes to South Africa, we have a list of ingredients, and they are all tested in the testing laboratory to make sure that they match. And you might know that that's why some of our vaccines got delayed for a while. We know that there are no microchips in it. We know that there's no virus in it. We know that there's nothing in it that can affect our DNA. So it's safe because we know exactly what's in it. The other thing is that we know what happens when you inject it into people. Firstly, because there have been trials of a few 100,000 people. And secondly, because, okay, Paballo, how many people worldwide have been vaccinated by now? No, how many vaccines have been given worldwide? I'll give you a clue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 billion.
I know
Your
that in South Africa,
watching.
I know that in South Africa, it's about 7 million. In America is 180 million. So I'll guess, just adding those two countries and many countries, I'll say, no, 4 billion.
4 billion. Yeah.
Thanks, teacher, for the clue.
4.5 billion people.
So it's almost the population of the world, because we are what, 7 billion? What?
Yeah.
What are we now? What are we sitting on now? 7.9 billion?
I'm not sure. But look, a lot of those are double vaccines. So, you know, a lot of those are 2 vaccines in one person. And actually, okay. I think you were right. Last week it was 7.5 million in South Africa. This week it's about 8.5 million. And the safety of this has been scrutinized. Every single adverse event, in other words, every single serious side effect, call it, has been studied, is collected by every country in the world where the vaccine's given, including South Africa. I did about a 6-hour course learning about the vaccine in South Africa, and at least an hour of it was the system for finding and reporting serious events. And in all that time, we know that there have been no major safety issues with any of them. So we know in the trials the vaccines were safe, and we know in the real world it's been safe. The best study I could find was in the UK, who have given 84 million vaccines. They estimate they have thereby saved 60,000 people from dying, if they look at their numbers. They probably won't ever need another lockdown, my word, wouldn't we wish for that? They have very closely investigated the 1,500 deaths that have happened after the vaccine. You know, because if you're giving 84 million people a vaccine shot, some of them would have died anyway. And what they have found is that on very thorough investigation of all of them, none of them have been linked back to the vaccine. Compared to that, they've had 6 million cases of COVID and 130,000 deaths. So I believe it's safe. Yes, you will have side effects. You might have pain at the injection site. Hello, you're putting a needle into your arm. You might get a little bit of fever, chills, headache. They might last a day or two, but serious side effects are minimal. When I had my vaccine, which was now February, because I'm a healthcare worker, that night I had serious side effects. I had a terrible headache. I was a bit nauseous, and my temperature was going up, and I was actually shaking. And I was sitting in bed saying to my husband, "Isn't this wonderful? My body's really reacting and making strong immunity here." So, and then when he had his vaccine, he only got a sore arm. He was very disappointed. So yeah, there will be side effects, but it's safe. Does it work? Yes, it does work. I think the important thing about the vaccine is it's a little like putting a seatbelt on. This is what we have to understand. It doesn't prevent every infection, but it makes infections much safer and less severe. So like when you drive a car, you put on a seatbelt. You're not trying to prevent the accident. You're trying to stop yourself from getting too badly injured if there is an accident. And the vaccine works in the same way. So we know that in trials, you know, the few 100,000 who had the vaccine initially, there were no COVID deaths in the trials. There was a very good prevention against severe illness, slightly less good against mild illness. But that was a few 100,000 people. In real life, of these 4.5 billion, especially those who've been completely vaccinated, we know that it still protects extremely well, very, very well against death, pretty well against severe disease, not quite as well against infection. So if you look at the various vaccines and various variants, some of them give kind of 90 to 95% protection against death, usually 85 to 95% protection against severe disease, maybe 60 to 70% protection against infection. So you might get infected, but it will be mild. It will be mild because you have less virus, you shed it for not as long, your body's got that army of soldiers ready to fight it off. The unfortunate thing, of course, is that it doesn't prevent all infections. And so as more and more people have been vaccinated, more and more vaccinated people will be the ones getting infections. And to be honest, that does confuse people. But just remember that in places like the UK, where about 50% of the population are completely vaccinated, yes, they're having a lot of cases, but they're not having it, or they're barely having an increase in hospitalization. So then just vaccines and Delta, very quickly, this is my last point. Vaccines don't prevent quite as well against Delta as they prevent against the original strain, but they definitely do prevent at least about 25-fold decrease in the chance of death, and at least probably 3 to 8-fold decrease in the chance of infection. So yes, there might be more infections, but there will not be more severe disease and death. Unfortunately, I do just have to add that it is starting to seem as if with Delta, the vaccine doesn't protect as well against transmission, against spreading the virus, as it protected other variants, with other variants. And that does mean, and particularly as we look at churches opening and lockdown ending, we do still have to be very careful not to spread the virus. And so unfortunately, that means in a population like South Africa, where so few people are vaccinated, we do still need to be really careful of wearing masks and social distancing and ventilating and doing all those things that we're tired of. So my summary, it's safe, it works. Who should get it? Almost everybody. Mainly the people who should get it are the people who are most scared. So the people who think, I'm too old to be vaccinated, I'm too sick to be vaccinated, I've got HIV, I've got diabetes, it will be dangerous for me. No. Those are the people for whom COVID is the most dangerous. Vaccines protect even more because their chance of death is higher. The only people who really shouldn't are pregnant women in their first trimester, their first 14 weeks, and at the moment, children. In South Africa, below the age of 18, other countries vaccinated younger. That's all I'm going to say. I hope it's not too late if it's too much. Sorry.
No, thanks, Dr. Jenny. I think, you see, all of us, I think we need the information, as much information as we can get. And part of what you've said to us tonight is exactly what we need to hear. So thank you for that information. Some of it we didn't know, obviously, and it's great to find out that there are people like you who are investing their time and resources and trying to make sure they gather as much information as they can. And we have the privilege of receiving that information from you. So for us who are joining and listening, we just want to remind you that while Doctor and I are having a quick chat, you can continue sending your questions on the chat. You can either put it on the group for everyone to see, like some people are doing, or you can send it privately if you don't want your name to be there, to myself or to Jen. You'll see Jen's picture has a Following Jesus logo. You can send it to Jen because also the doctor, her name is Jenny, so don't confuse the two. Jen is the one with the Following Jesus logo. And then also, if you feel like you don't want to type, but you want to actually speak and ask your question, you can raise your hand. There's an icon that looks like this, the one that I have on the top of my screen. You can raise your hand, and when we are ready, we'll recognize you, and then you can be able to ask your question directly to the doctor. Right now, what's going to happen is I'm going to go into just a quick role play with the doctor. It's not going to be long, and I'm going to ask her some of the other basic questions that we've heard from people generally who are asking from concerns people are having. And like the doctor said, not a concern because they're trying to scare people, but a concern because they are trying to take care of themselves and they're really worried because this is new for all of us. So doctor, can we begin the role play, and then I'm gonna try to keep it as short as possible because we want to give people enough time to ask the questions they have. So I'm gonna begin, doctor. So doctor, thank you for everything that you've said to us. Can you just elaborate for us what is the difference between the different vaccines, and are the side effects the same? Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and all of them. Can you just quickly explain to us the difference between those vaccines? Because some they say you get 2 jabs and then some you get 1 jab. Please clarify that for us.
Okay, so basically there are 4 different kinds of COVID vaccines, and 3 of them have been registered in this country. And the difference between all of them is how they introduce that little bit of virus or pretend virus into the system. So the Pfizer vaccine uses something called mRNA, and that mRNA is basically a recipe that goes into the cell. It doesn't go near the DNA, it just goes into the outer part of the cell and makes a recipe for making spike protein, which then the body learns how to fight. Viral vector vaccines, so that's like the Johnson & Johnson, uses a virus, but a totally harmless, very weak form of a virus, not the coronavirus, it's called an adenovirus, which can't itself multiply in the body because it's been weakened deliberately, but it puts a little bit of a recipe into the cell again, so that the cell can make the spike protein. Then we get the Sinopharm, or Sinovac, which has recently been approved here. That is actually the more old-fashioned kind of virus vaccine, which is a weakened form of the real virus, which again has, so it's a bit more like something like the measles virus was. And then there's another one which we don't have, where a little bit of protein gets injected. Really, I don't understand what makes some need 1 and some need 2. I know that it seems that if you give one, your body starts to fight it, and then you need a booster and it gets even better. But I'm afraid I don't understand why, for instance, Johnson & Johnson is only 1.
Thank you so much, doctor. But doctor, if we look at social media, we see lots of stories. People claim, my granny took the vaccine, 2 weeks later, she died. My aunt took the vaccine, 2 weeks later, she died. These are people with real stories, and that causes fear. So can we speak into that? Can the vaccine really kill people? You touched on it earlier, but people have stories that they're sharing, and it's many people now. And can you just clarify to us, can the vaccine kill people? And if yes, how? And if no, how come not?
Okay, so when the vaccines were on trial, there were no deaths from the vaccine. There were some deaths during the trial, because in a drug trial, if anybody dies from anything, you have to report it. So if you have your vaccination shot and you go outside and you get run over by a car, that is a death included in the trial. But it's not caused by the vaccine. Once you put it in the real world, if you think about it, when they started vaccinating, they started by vaccinating the oldest people, and therefore the people who were most likely to die. Because if you go into an old age home, sad to say, but if you go into an old age home, or you start by vaccinating the over 80s, that's the group that are more likely to die anyway. And if you vaccinate enough of them, some of them will die a short time after the vaccination. With all those deaths, they've been kept, certainly in the States and the UK, well, and in South Africa, they've been very carefully studied to say, was that death actually caused by a complication of the vaccine, or was it somebody who would have died anyway? And with almost every single death, they found that it was somebody who had a different disease that they would have died anyway. And then what they did is they take, let's say, the average life expectancy of an 80-year-old living in Wisconsin in America, and they say in a month, I don't know the numbers, you'd expect 280-year-olds to die. Then you look after vaccine and say, okay, we vaccinated all the 80-year-olds in America, how many died? Or in Wisconsin, how many died? If their answer is still 80, then you can be pretty sure that none of them died because of the vaccine. If the answer is 180, then yes, maybe the vaccine caused some of the excess deaths. Does that sound clear enough?
I think it does. I think it does give some clarity. Please continue, Doctor.
And then as they moved down the age groups in the countries that have moved down the age groups, they did repeatedly find that far fewer people died in the months after the vaccine, because far fewer people would have died anyway. So always the deaths after the vaccine matched what one would expect in that age group. And for me, that's very real world information. There have been a very small number. So, there've been a very small number of blood clots, people who developed blood clots after the AZ or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And I think about 6 per million developed blood clots. And of those, a very small number died. And that was mainly in the early days before people understood the mechanism of the blood clot. So yeah, I can't say nobody's ever died of the vaccine, but certainly my reading of as much up-to-date literature as I can work out, it's incredibly, if it's 1 in a million, that would be a lot. Whereas, and remember that COVID, has a 2% death rate. So it would be 1 million, do the maths, would that be 20,000? Something like that. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks for that clarity, Doctor. I appreciate it. So I'm going to now, we have some questions that have come through. I'm going to move to the questions that have come through from some of the audience. And I'll start with this question that we got. It says that, is it true that some of the COVID vaccines are made out of aborted babies' cells?
Oh, that is such a difficult question. That is such a difficult question. So actually, I looked up an explanation for that, because to explain that, what I have to tell you that a lot of medical research is done in human cells. And these are not, if I could say, freshly harvested human cells. These are cells which have been, let's say, harvested in some cases 20, 30, 40 years ago. And there are cells which are continuing to grow in cultures all over the world. So yes, there are some of those kind of lines of cells did way back originally come from maybe an umbilical cord, or maybe, yes, sadly, I would use the term miscarried fetus, not deliberately aborted fetus. because fetal cells multiply easily. But in the coronavirus vaccine research, there wouldn't be any kind of fresh lines of fetal cell. So it's not that babies that miscarried last year or the year before, their cells would have been used in making the vaccine. But in a lot of medical research, drugs, vaccines, yes, human cells are used, but they are cells which have grown in a culture medium. Does this make sense to you?
Sure, it does make sense, but it sounds from listening to it, it sounds painful, it sounds complicated, it sounds it's everything at once. But the person who's asked, I hope that they've received the answer they need. Pastor Sai, I hope that he's responded by saying the answer you've given is very helpful. So if you have anything to add to that, I'll let you do, Doctor.
Yeah, just one more thing. The Pfizer vaccine did not use any fetal cell lines. The Johnson & Johnson did. And just very briefly, the most famous cell line in medicine comes from cancer of a cervix from a woman who died 30, 40, 50 years ago. And her cells were just found to be very, very useful to do research on. So, she had the cancer cut out, and the cells were found to be very useful to do research on because they multiplied so well. So, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Doctor, for responding to that, for a difficult one. But I guess it's out there now, we know, and at least it's information that is good to have. Here is another question. It says, I have 2 autoimmune diseases and 2 heart syndromes. How safe is it for me? I have CKD, which is kidney failure. How safe is it for me? And if I've recovered, so I'm just joining the questions together, Doctor. It says, if I have recovered from COVID, is it necessary for me to get vaccinated, or is natural immunity enough? So maybe let me leave you with those 2 questions, and then we can come back to more questions as we receive them.
So is it safe for people with heart disease and CKD? Yes, absolutely, no question about it. It's been trialed in people with CKD and heart disease. Sorry, CKD is chronic kidney disease. It's been trialed in those people, and around the world it has now been given to millions and millions of people. In fact, my mother has CKD and heart disease. The CKD is very mild, but she's been vaccinated and she's 92. The autoimmune question is a little bit more tricky. So firstly, it's not none of them are the kind of live virus vaccines which could cause you any risk if you've got an autoimmune disease. So having an autoimmune disease and getting the vaccine does not make you at all likely to get COVID from the vaccine, because there's no live virus in the vaccine, no live COVID virus in it. And equally, the vaccine which is produced from a virus, that virus can't multiply. The trouble with autoimmune diseases is you might not develop particularly good immunity. So if you've got an autoimmune disease and you are therefore on drugs to suppress your immunity, it might be that those same drugs will suppress the ability of your body to develop an immune response. So it's not dangerous for you, but it just might not be quite as beneficial. Depending on what the autoimmune disease is, you might want to discuss with your doctors, and again, depending on the drugs you're on and the autoimmune disease, some people would be told to stop their drugs for a week or 2 before and after the vaccine, if they can, just so that they will develop better immunity. And there is also talk about people with autoimmune disease having a 3rd booster, a 3rd dose. So it wouldn't be dangerous with autoimmune disease, but it is likely or possible to be less effective. So depending on what it is, we need to discuss that. Does that answer the question well enough? For that
Yeah,
question?
it does. It does. Thank you so much, Doctor. There is another question that came through, but before I ask it, would that be the same with people with TB, HIV, and so on? It's okay for them to take the vaccine?
Very much so. In my practice, we've got a lot of HIV positive patients, and I have this conversation often. Autoimmune diseases and HIV sadly make people more vulnerable to severe COVID if they do get infected. Any immunity from the vaccine helps to protect them. I'm sorry, Paballo, there was the question about recovered versus natural versus vaccine immunity.
Yes.
Okay. So the question was, I've recovered from COVID, so I've got natural immunity. Does that mean the vaccine will still be useful? I think that's the question. Currently, the answer is thought to be yes, very definitely, for two reasons. The one is that it seems possible that the vaccine protects against more variants. So you might have natural immunity to the beta strain, but still be liable for the delta strain. Whereas if you've been vaccinated, you're more likely to be immune also to the delta strain. That's the first question, first answer. The second answer is yes. If you're vaccinated, you produce different antibodies, which seem maybe to last longer than natural immunity. And thirdly, with Delta, we definitely know that people who've been vaccinated are less likely to be reinfected with Delta. So yeah, it's very useful. It's a slightly different antibody. You can't test vaccine antibodies in the same way that you test ordinary immune antibodies, but it's definitely helpful to vaccinate as well.
Sure, that's helpful. Thanks, Doctor. And here's another question. Is this going to be just like a flu vaccine that will be administered every year and be made mandatory?
Okay, two bits there, aren't there? Every year and mandatory. Mandatory. So every year we don't know yet is the honest answer. We know that Johnson & Johnson definitely lasts for 8 months. We don't know it hasn't been around long enough for us to be sure about others, about how much longer it lasts. One of the problems with COVID is we don't know what tests to do to prove that immunity is still lasting, because that science hasn't been done yet. You know, with some diseases it's easy to tell, with some diseases it's not. So we don't know yet how to tell, apart from by looking at what's happening to people who've been vaccinated. So we don't know. It might become an every year thing, or a more frequent thing. But you know, if you think of things like pneumococcus, that's every 5 years. Other vaccines are every 10 years. We just don't know yet. I mean, the flu vaccine isn't mandatory, and well, there'd be a huge fuss if anyone wanted to make the COVID vaccine mandatory. Yeah, I doubt.
Yeah.
I think what might happen though is people's freedom gets impaired a bit if they're not vaccinated. So France is saying if you want to go to a restaurant, you must either be vaccinated or have a COVID test. That sort of thing might change, but that really means people are free to decide what to do.
Sure. Thanks so much, Doctor. Here's another question. I read somewhere that J&J causes blood clots. Is this correct? Is there anything that one can take to prevent a blood clot? For example, blood thinners from over the counter. Is it true that the vaccine will reduce fertility for those that decide to take it?
Okay, must I answer now?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, very, very, very sadly, the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca do have a very low risk of blood clots, maybe somewhere between 3 to 6 per million people who take one of those vaccines could get a blood clot. It seems to be women under the age of 40 who are most at risk. So it's not the usual suspects. It's not the people who would usually be in line for blood clots. It's a completely different group of people. And what was confusing originally, but we don't now know, is that it's not the normal kind of blood clot. So just, normally blood clots happen and blood gets thicker and more sticky and all sorts of things. In this case, the blood clots seem to go with a low platelet count and a couple of other differences, which means that they need to be treated differently. And now that we know that, it's much less common for people to become severely ill because of the blood clots. In South Africa, 500,000 healthcare workers got blood clots. Got vaccine. Sorry.
I almost fell off my chair. I'm like 500,000. Wow.
Yeah. No. 500,000 people got the vaccine because they were healthcare workers. A lot of them were women and a lot of them were under 40. There were 2 people got blood clots and both of them were treated and recovered well.
So would you say it's would you say like the person is asking about, for example, blood thinners from over the counter? Should people try to take those kind of things after taking the vaccines, just in case?
Unfortunately, the normal blood thinners don't work in the vaccine-induced blood clots. So no, they shouldn't. And equally, people who have had blood clots in the past or who've been told they're at risk of blood clots, it's fine for them to take it. Just to put it in perspective, the oral contraceptive pill causes, I'm losing the figures out of my head now, but the oral contraceptive pill causes way more blood clots per person taking it than the vaccine causes. Pregnancy causes way more blood clots, and COVID itself causes way more blood clots. So, a lot of people take the oral contraceptive pill and a lot of people get pregnant. And their chances of blood clots are much, much higher, just to say.
So this issue about blood clots is not a new thing. It's something that happens depending on the conditions people have and whether you're pregnant, like you say, or you. So it's not like it's a new thing with vaccines that causes blood clots.
Not at all. So I've got the figures here. 3 per million of people get blood clots after the vaccine. In the general population, 3 per million will get blood clots. But okay, so the vaccine is an additional. Taking the pill, 27 to 400, depending on the study, per million will get blood clots. Pregnancy, 100 per million will get blood clots. People who get COVID, 165,000 per million will get blood clots.
Sure. And so, doctor, just to go back, you said it's mainly the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca that has proven that can get blood. So are you saying Pfizer does not cause blood clots? Is it proven?
I haven't read about it in relation to Pfizer. I can't be 100% sure. There might be something I've missed, but it's the ones that are mainly a problem are Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca.
Sure. Thank you so much, doctor. Here's another question. Do you know where there's a new oral treatment / vaccine that is being developed in Israel? What do you think about this as an alternative? Let you answer that one.
Okay, can I just first answer the fertility question?
Oh yes, sorry, I forgot that one.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
I forgot that one. Thank you.
So it does seem that a very small number of people who get the vaccine have disturbed periods for a couple, they might have just a little bit of extra bleeding or a disturbed period for a month or so. And maybe it's because of that people are worried about fertility. What obstetricians and specialists say is there's absolutely no reason for it to affect fertility because it doesn't affect any organ or hormone associated with fertility. So there's no reason for it to affect fertility. We do know that you shouldn't take it in the first 3 months of pregnancy, but there's no evidence that it affects fertility. What I'd like to know is how many people who've had the vaccine have become pregnant. And that's hard because of the age groups who've been vaccinated and the order in which it's happened. But there's no other vaccine worldwide that affects fertility. So there's no reason.
So all of them are safe from what you're saying, from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson and all of them?
From what we know, yeah.
Okay, great stuff.
And
Do you want to answer that question about an oral treatment from Israel?
I think it's fabulous. I know absolutely nothing about it. There's a big race on to get either oral or nasal treatment. There's a huge race on because if we do end up, well, firstly, you know, there's so many unvaccinated people, and giving an oral one is much easier. Also, if we end up needing boosters, oral or nose spray is a hang of a lot easier. So there are a lot of companies working on it, and I really hope we get one soon.
Wow.
But
Okay.
I don't know much, you know, I don't know any more than that.
Okay, no, thanks, Doctor. So there's this question that I think all of us have been trying to battle and wrestle with it. Will being around people who are not vaccinated be high risk of getting COVID to a vaccinated person?
Okay. So will being around unvaccinated people be, you know, the increased risk goes both ways, I would say. So bearing in mind that vaccination prevents severe disease and death much better than it prevents infection and spread, people who are vaccinated could actually spread it to unvaccinated people, and those unvaccinated people might have it more severely. And for me, that's the big argument why the small number of us who've been vaccinated should continue to be extremely careful. Equally, because it doesn't totally protect against infection, being around unvaccinated people will be like being in that car accident, but you're wearing a seatbelt. So yes, you might get it. They're more likely to transmit it to you, but you've got your seatbelt, so it's much less likely that you'll get it badly. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does, Doctor. But here's a follow-up question that, again, many people struggle with. You mentioned France, and even here, there are some of the companies that are trying to go to court to try to apply. But then if I'm vaccinated and someone is not, why are we not allowing people who are not vaccinated? For an example, in the UK, you can't enter a stadium if you're not vaccinated. But if the only danger is that you're going to transmit it to me, even me who's vaccinated, if I'm carrying it, I can give it to another vaccinated person. So can you just explain that logic? Because a lot of people struggle with that understanding.
Are you saying, just to be clear, are you saying that because I'm vaccinated, it's okay if I get COVID because I'll have it mildly? Or
No.
are you saying because I'm vaccinated?
So people are asking this question, Doctor. In the UK and other countries, like you mentioned in France, they are saying, if you want to get into a restaurant, show us your COVID test or your vaccine certificate. We just watched the Olympics and we've just watched the Euro soccer, where we saw the stadiums were full, but only people who are vaccinated could get into the stadiums or with a COVID test. So people are arguing that, why are you not allowing people who are not vaccinated into stadiums when really vaccine is only protecting me? So the person who's not vaccinated, it's really for their own good. And me, if I have the vaccine, I'm going to be protected. So, so the people are asking, because when I have the vaccine, it does not mean I'm not going to transmit it. We could both be vaccinated and I get COVID and I can still give it to you. It just means that we have our seatbelts on. Yes. So why are we not? So people are asking, why are other people putting these regulations of you can't enter this if you don't have a vaccine? Because we are all going to get it, vaccinated or not. The difference is that I'm more protected than the person who doesn't have it. Does it make sense?
I get it, yeah, I get it. Are you saying that unvaccinated people have taken a choice not to be vaccinated, and so let them live with it, and if they get COVID, they get COVID? And if they get it severely, they get it severely, but allow them their freedom anyway. I think that's what you're saying.
That's what people are arguing.
People are saying.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So I would say that there are. You see, vaccination does reduce transmission, and it doesn't take it away completely, but it does reduce transmission, and therefore it does reduce spread. So if you're going for protecting person by person, yes, the vaccinated person's fine and the unvaccinated can take their chances. But think of how many other people that unvaccinated person could then go on and infect. So 10 unvaccinated people went into a stadium of 100 vaccinated people. Those 10 all got COVID. They're all going to go home on the train. They're all going to go to their families. They're going to go to school. They might be the ones who don't wear masks so well. They're going to go to school, they're going to go to work, they're going to go and visit their grandmothers, and they're going to spread it. The people who are vaccinated already, let's say 90 of them were vaccinated already, 10 of them get it. So only 10% of them, close to 10% of them get it. Yes, they do have a potential to spread it, but their potential to spread it is much less. So you're actually protecting the whole community by not allowing those unvaccinated people in.
So, doctor, you are saying that if you are vaccinated, your transmitting rate is less than when you are not vaccinated.
Yes, it's still there, but it's
that?
less. So when you're vaccinated, you have less virus in your system because you've got those soldiers. So the soldiers are killing the virus in the system. So when you cough and sneeze and splutter, there's less virus around to infect other people. And also because you kill the virus faster, you are infectious for a shorter time.
Sure.
I feel like I'm not explaining this. I feel like I'm not explaining this one very well.
You are, doctor. You know why? It's because, I mean, almost everywhere I've been, this has been the concern. Why am I not being allowed with an unvaccinated person? If me as a vaccinated person, I can still transmit. And a lot of people cannot explain that, but you've just explained it well by saying that the virus gets killed quickly in your body. Therefore, even the virus load that you release is not as much as the person who's not vaccinated, right? I'm understanding you well.
Yeah. And the other thing to say, if I can just say one more thing, and that is one of the things about vaccination is it keeps people out of hospital. And you know in Gauteng, and I know what's happening now in the Western Cape. We had so many people in hospital that people were dying because they couldn't get oxygen or beds. So simply keeping people out of hospital improves the general survival rate. So keeping those unvaccinated people free of COVID and out of hospital also just improves the situation for everybody.
Sure, that's so helpful, doctor. Thank you so much. There's a follow-up question about blood clots that I think it's important. What symptoms can one be on the lookout for blood clots, and how would you know if you have the blood clots, like after taking the vaccine? What are some of the symptoms?
Okay, so the blood clots usually happen in veins, so they would be the same kind of things you would look out for after something like an airplane flight. So if a blood clot is blocking the blood passage, you will get swelling. So for instance, swelling in one leg only could mean that there's a blood clot there. A lot of pain in one leg, for instance, because they often happen in the leg. Unexpected severe pain in the tummy. And then the other thing, there is a small number of blood clots happen in the head, and they would generally cause a very unusual severe headache. Not just the kind of side effect headache that you have in the first day or two, but it might take 3 or 4, 5 days, and your headache might be much more severe. When you're vaccinated, you're given a little information sheet about side effects to watch out for.
Sure. Thank you so much, Doctor. That's helpful. There's another question that says, what do you think about the success of the doctor in Port Alfred who has been using ivermectin? Yeah, ivermectin combined with other medical administrations and prevented hospitalization and need for ventilating.
Ivermectin's a famous question, isn't it? Again, quite complex. Look, I think good for him. His patients haven't been to hospital, they haven't needed to be ventilated. That's absolutely wonderful. I can show you lots of patients who haven't been to hospital or needed to be ventilated who have not taken ivermectin. And probably, if you think of how many people get it, for everyone who's recovered well with ivermectin, there are probably 10 or 20 people who've recovered well without ivermectin. And the whole reason that people do medical trials is to make sure that you're taking away that kind of bias and you're checking like for like. So I think it's possible that ivermectin works. I don't know. There are a huge number of people who are unbelievably vociferous about it. I don't quite understand why. They really believe it works, and so they're really trying to help the world. For me, because I go by the science, I think that we haven't had enough good scientific studies to really work out the evidence for ivermectin. So if I said to you that I've vaccinated 450 people and none of them died and none of them got COVID, would you believe me that vaccination never causes death and that everyone who gets vaccinated doesn't get COVID? No, you'd ask for how many billion people in the world it's been studied on. Similarly, with something like ivermectin, I think we have to wait for the good study. Again, I don't know why they've taken so long. I don't believe the conspiracy theories about that, but there are very good studies happening at the moment. In the UK, there are 2 very good, very scientific studies, which I think will tell us the answer. I just think we don't quite know the answer yet.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Doctor. There is a follow-up question to what we discussed before we spoke about the doctor from Port Alfred, and it says, doesn't antibody certificate give a person an equal freedom to do what vaccinated people can do?
The trouble with the antibody certificate is we don't know how long COVID immunity lasts after a natural infection, and we don't know if the presence or absence of antibodies actually means the person is immune. So we just don't know what to measure to make sure people are immune. We do, if you had your COVID less than 30 days ago, you're free to do almost anything, as long as you're after your 10-day isolation period. So, Paballo, if you get COVID and then 2 weeks later your wife gets COVID, you can see her, you can go out, you can do anything, because we know that within 30 days you can't get it again. Anything longer than that, you can get it again, even if you've still got antibodies, especially with Delta. And so I think for that reason, there's no such thing really as an antibody certificate, but antibodies aren't as useful.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. We've had so many questions that we've dealt with so far that there's, I think, from what I've heard you say, like brought so much clarity into some of the questions that we might have had. Any more questions from the people on the floor? Are there any more questions?
Babs, can I ask?
Yes, Chief, you can go ahead.
It's how do you deal then with people who are anti-vaccinations and you're trying to care as much for them as you can? Yeah, how do you engage, really? I guess that's the question. How do you engage? Because there are people in our lives who don't want to take vaccines, and you want them to because you know it's good for them, but they are really adamant that they don't want to take it?
Great question, Chief. Thank you so much. Doctor?
Yes, I'd be interested in your answer to that one, Paballo. But my answer to that is you deal with them very gently. You try to understand where they're coming from, and you try to find out exactly what their hesitancy is. If you can talk into their particular hesitancy with any fact, that's worth doing. If you can give, if they've got specific misinformation and you can give it to them, that's worth doing. But I don't think you can hope to convince people. All you can do is maybe give them more information on which to base their choices. When social scientists talk about it, they talk about the vaccine eager, the vaccine hesitant, and the anti-vaxxers. And the Department of Health, on the course that I did, just said there's not a lot of point in really engaging the serious anti-vaxxers, because they usually haven't arrived at that because of reason, and you can't reason them out of that view. But the vaccine hesitant, in my practice, I ask everybody I see, have you been vaccinated? And the ones who don't want, I always ask them why. And the range of answers is incredible. And often things I wouldn't have anticipated. I'm worried about an allergy. My grandmother had a blood clot. I was once told that I might have a blood clot, all sorts of things. So I think all one can do is try to find out exactly what their particular fear is, and try to, and I say, look, I'm not going to try to convince you, but what I can tell you is that the evidence says blah, blah. And inside I am sometimes screaming, but yeah.
Sure. And I guess just, Doctor, from a pastoral point of view, or from a Christian language point of view, we need, this is where we can apply the grace and gentleness and kindness and love to people, even the people we disagree with, and try to actually, from experience, what has helped me in conversations, even with serious anti-vaxxers, has always been trying to make them feel like they have been heard, they have been listened to, and they are given a space to express what they feel. Not that we need to agree with them, but then not try to convince them, but show grace, show love, show kindness, speak gently with them. Don't make them feel like they're fools, but still try to speak what you believe in truth and in love. So that's what I've learned from the question that has been asked. There is someone who needs clarity on something that you've touched on, Doctor. We have 7 minutes left, so I'm just cognizant of the time. But the question, it says, is there a real difference between natural immunity and vaccine immunity? Don't they both give us immunity?
Yes, they do, both. But the natural immunity, I think, lasts for a much shorter time. We're not sure, but it does certainly seem as if the natural immunity lasts for shorter. It certainly seems that the vaccine immunity lasts for longer and is better against more variants.
Okay.
When you measure immunity, natural immunity, you measure the N antibody, and vaccine immunity, you measure the S antibody. So you're making different things and measuring different things.
Okay, cool. Sure. Doctor, I think this time has been very valuable. One of the things that I was thinking, I was like, whoa, I'm going to be talking to a doctor. She's going to be talking a lot of language I don't understand, and I don't know how I'm going to, but you've simplified this so much that even a layperson like me understood almost everything you said. So I think I leave I think I leave this conversation more knowledgeable and more empowered to continue having conversations with some of the people I meet, and at least I can base it on what I believe is truthful information from what you've given us, because you're speaking from your career, what you practice every day, and from the knowledge that you gather. So on behalf of everyone who's on this call, I just want to deeply thank you for taking your time to be with us and for sharing the information that you shared with us. I believe all of us are empowered, and we live here with a piece of information that we never used to have, and today we have it. There's still 5 minutes left. If someone wants to ask a question, if there's no question, I'm gonna release the doctor and say thank you again for being here with us. Oh, it's just people on the chat saying thank you, Dr. Jenny, for your time and simple way of presenting your info. People are agreeing with me that you presented the info in a way that even laymen like me can understand. So thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Thanks very much for giving me the chance to meet you. And thanks for your questions.
Yeah, and I believe it's not going to be the last time we meet each other. So we'll continue being here and I guess doing live together from far apart. You in Cape Town, me in Joburg. And yeah, we can continue teaching each other, iron sharpening iron, because we can talk about diversity stuff that we've learned, and you can continue teaching us about technical stuff, about health and stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It looks like there's no questions, just people thanking you for your time. So with that said, Doctor, thank you once again. Siyabonga, re a leboga, baya danki, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Shosho.
Thank you.
Siyabonga.
Inkosi.
Good night,
Inkosi
everyone.
kakhulu.
Enkosi kakhulu. Enkosi kakhulu. Good night, everyone. Doctor, thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.